Christian, welcome to Easy Conversations. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm really excited to have you on the show and learn more about your story. I think we've been able to cover a little bit when we last chatted, and I found your journey very interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into it, and especially around some of the things we've already talked about when it comes to connection, especially in the digital world we live in, and your view on why sometimes people can get stuck in this box. But I think part of it is also through your own journey in life and some of the shifts you've made along the way. So we'll definitely get into all of that. But before we do, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Great. Sure. I'm so excited to be here and thank you for having me. And my name's Christian Hurst. I'm the author of the Lilly Starling series. My background is in advertising and marketing, brand marketing, but recently my whole life really, I've been telling stories, and recently I've been publishing my novels that I've been working on for a long time. Excited to see people responding to that work and to see some excitement out there. It's fun to, as an artist, when you put your work out there in the world and you see people reacting to it in a way that you really hoped that they would. So that's been very
Yeah,
fulfilling.
that's cool. So what made you want to write, especially being in advertising and marketing? Where was that desire coming from?
Yeah, it's like I said, I've been telling stories my whole life. I used to write when I was like 11 years old. I've written comic books, and I've always been an artist and love to create. And I did some filmmaking for a while. So I think my corporate career, what it provided me for the last 15 plus years was the ability to put my work out there and not be so precious about it, not be
Mhm.
terrified. Because when you're a young artist putting your work out there, it's really hard because you're putting a part of yourself into the world and hoping, like I said, that people will respond to it. But once you've put that ad campaign out there for a million people to see, and then people forget about it the next day for better or for worse, it could be somebody's favorite thing, but then the next minute they've totally forgotten about it. And so that sort of prepares you for the ability to share your
Mhm.
work in a way that's where you can let go of it and let it go out there into the
Right.
world and just feel the energy from it. That's where my corporate life
Mhm.
comes into that
For sure.
process.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing there is like that fear of perhaps for a lot of people, it could be of being criticized or judged. That goes away in a way over time as you've experienced for yourself, that you were no longer attached to a specific outcome with the work. So that gave you that little bit of additional courage.
Exactly. Yeah, you just have to let it out there and just let it be what it is and see how people
Yeah,
react.
for sure. Okay. And let's just jump right into it. So you talked about early life where you've always been telling stories. One of the things I found fascinating was you grew up Mormon, and then at some point you decided to make the shift and look at things differently. Are you able to walk us through that journey? And I'm sure I'll have a lot of questions around that.
Sure, absolutely. It's one of those things where everybody has their own unique experience in life and learning
Mhm.
about their path and how to get become true to themselves, so to speak. And for me, it was just I never always really fit in. I never felt right when it came to that whole world. And a lot of times I felt like I was on the outside looking in. And I think that could be actually superpower. It could be a fresh perspective because you're not necessarily connected to it the same way other people are. But it can also be incredibly lonely, this world of feeling like you're an outsider. And so that has informed my life. It's you have to find that inner truth and really be true to who you are. And that's what gets you through those hard times is that strong sense of self. Because everyone is
Mhm.
going to see you when they approach you or if they know you or think they know you. and they're going to have a certain set of expectations about you. And if you start to define yourself by the expectations of everybody else, then that's when you open yourself up to all of these influences that could really make you doubt yourself. When you have that strong sense of
Mhm.
self, that's when you can get through those dark times. And so that was really it for me. Is I reached a point in my life where I was like, I really gave this my best shot, and it's not who I am. And so in order to be really at peace with who I am, I had to walk away from that world. But I don't I know some people are resentful or whatever, but I just see it all as part of making me who I am. And so that was a part of my life. And now I'm in a different chapter, most of my life. So
Yes. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I think I agree with you in the sense that you wanna have that sense of self where you're not necessarily taking outside information in to form some sort of idea of or identity around who you are, but that can be very tough because a lot of people fall into that trap of external validation. So, to recognize that for yourself, what were some things that you did? Because for a lot of people, like I said, it is difficult, especially when you're younger and your entire identity perhaps in a way is based on what the adults in your life are telling you, but then to be able to take a step back and recognize, like you said, I still feel like I'm on the outside looking in, and how do I form this sense of self? I can relate to what you're sharing, and that's why I want to explore this further because I struggled with that sense of self. There was a lot of doubt, and there's a lot of doubt being fed into me, maybe consciously, subconsciously, but that did affect me and how I looked at things.
yeah, and believe it or not, it comes full circle back to the storytelling because when I was a kid, that's what got me through, and that's what helped reinforce, like, my true sense of self was the stories and the worlds that I was able to explore through literature and through science fiction mostly, but different
Mhm,
art forms that spoke to me. It gave me a language to think about who I was without any sort of filter telling me who I was, and so, like, that it was also just through my observation of now I can put words to it. Now I can say I talk a lot about absolutism. Some of my favorite authors, like Victor Hugo, talk about the dangers of absolutism. And the so now I can put words to it. But at the time I just observed like people would get up in church and say, I know this, I know that, I know the church is true, or I know this is going to happen. And then
mhm,
something would cause them to doubt, or that thing wouldn't happen. And it really just wrecked them. It made them feel like their world was falling apart. And so I would
mhm,
observe that, and it got me thinking like, they, they don't know, they want to know, that brings some comfort is this idea that they
yes,
know, but they don't
right,
actually know. What the only thing you can know is what's in here. So that brings it back to that sense of self where you have to have that strong sense of self
mhm,
so that the seduction of things like absolutism and this like pure knowledge that's given to you from another source, you can look at it for what it is instead of being pulled into that. Because otherwise you're going to have the
yeah,
rug constantly pulled out from under you if you are
mhm,
relying on this truth that other people are giving in.
yeah, and I think in that, what I'm hearing, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I think in general, as humans, we are fearful of uncertainty, and sometimes the future entirely is uncertain, so people struggle with that, and I think when you're given some sort of answer, it can give you some level of comfort, even if it's
Absolutely.
false, a false sense of comfort. I can definitely see some truth to why people will then, yeah, it can fracture your entire belief, right? When you have this, yeah, if you have this idea and all of a sudden it's being questioned. I know even a form of trauma is centered around that, where all of a sudden what you thought was true or what you believed in all of a sudden is no longer there or is no longer true and you're exposed to it. So that's where a lot of people experience trauma too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people, their minds are then conditioned to look for the next source of truth. And so that it proved to be false. So I'm just going to look for someone else to tell me the answer. And that's dangerous too,
Hmm.
because you're still looking for that external validation or that external source of reality where we all have the mental capacity to use our minds and our logic and look for patterns in the world and say, oh, like going back to what I said, people get up and they say, I know this, I know that, I know, or you'll hear it now all the time with the election or whatever. It's, you know, what's going to happen in the next election, or I know what's going to happen with this corporation or that thing or the other.
Hmm.
And it's, you don't know. And it's actually, once you
Yes.
admit that you don't know, then we can start solving the real problems. But like everybody going around thinking that they have some special knowledge or insight of the future, that's what gets
Mm.
us into these situations because they're looking for people bloviating about what's going to happen in the future, like they know, and it's people latch onto that like
Mm.
crazy because I think that's how our minds are
Right.
conditioned.
Yes. No, I can definitely agree with that. And coming back to that sense of self, because that's the only thing that's really true, is knowing how you're feeling and what's going on inside for you. So I think that's an important distinction there. But do you feel once you've established a sense of self, do you still need some sort of orientation in life that gives you direction? And maybe for some people, it can be religion. For some people, it can be whatever they believe in, but at least there's some sort of orientation. How do you put that together and how do you view that?
Yes, and that's for me, it's a humanism. It's this idea that we are connected, that connection happen. Like you take care of the first part, and these themes are
Mhm.
actually in my book a lot. But it's like you take care of that first part where you create that core sense of self, and then if you work on that, the connection will happen. And I think when we connect to other people, truly, it's we start to see the world differently because we start to see that we have more in common with each other than we have different. And so I'm not looking at someone on the street that and immediately noticing the differences and weaponizing them and going at them with hate in my heart. I'm coming from a perspective of commonality, and then we can
Mm.
start to connect in a way that's productive, if not meaningful. And so I think for me, it's that kind of humanism where like we have such capacity as humans to energize each other, to lift each other up, and to do great things, even if we disagree on superficial stuff. And I think a lot more of it is superficial than we care to admit.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Which probably brings us to another part that you and I've talked about was the role social media is playing in the world today, as much as, and I've said this many times on the podcast, but as much as it seems that we're more connected, and maybe there is truth to that, but there is a false sense of connection at times. And to your point, perhaps even superficial in that sense. What are your ideas around social media and the role it's playing in people's ability to connect, not only with themselves, but others as well?
I think that, like what we're doing right now, I think is a genuine human connection. I think that kind of connection can happen between people using the technology that we have, using the tools that we have. I think that social media, though, is more like junk food in terms of it's entertainment. It's not, you feel like you've connected with people because the people that you know are on there, but it's not real interaction. It's entertainment more, I think, than anything. Or it's that, I think it was Jon Stewart who recently said it's like junk food or highly processed food for
Yes. Yeah.
communication or something like that. But I thought that was a good point because it's like, is it feeds you and it makes you feel good sometimes or feel whatever you want to feel. But
Mhm.
the it's not real in the sense of this kind of deep connection where you can actually, I don't know, get something enriching. out of it or nourishing.
Yeah, and one of the things as you were talking, I realized too, I remember growing up, and I think they're still there, but when you're in the grocery store and on the newsstand, you see these magazines like the National Enquirer or whatever, where there's so much gossip about people, and you get that dose too through social media where there's just negativity and just gossip around celebrities or people in general. And I think people, for some reason, are drawn to that.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I think there's some sense of joy in knowing that, hey, everyone else is suffering too, so I'm not the only one. There's that sense
Yeah,
of
it is. It's a
revenge.
cathartic. Yeah, it's cathartic, I think. But that's what, and I think
Yeah.
yes, social media can be that way. I think we seek out that kind of anything to distract us, right, from our own problems, anything to distract us from the reality of that impending sense of doom that people talk about that the
Yes.
world has, which is always there. I mean, there's always this layer of like dark clouds if you look for them. But I feel my background is in branding, as I mentioned, and I think that having a background in brand, it taught me something about telling the story that you want to put on for different audiences, right? And so if I want you to see me a certain way, I can I can influence that through the way that I present myself online or set up the and I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing. People automatically think it's a fakeness or it's like you are putting on this mask. But it can also be around boundaries if we do it in a healthy way. It's if I want to make us, for example, when I talk about my book online, I keep it very positive, but I keep certain boundaries in place so that I eliminate any sort of like snark or bickering or negative type of conversation.
Hmm.
And so I think we can create environments online that are good, safe spaces for people to come and get information and get energy but it has to be deliberate. I think if you just start barreling down the internet, it's gonna turn negative real fast because that's just almost human nature is to just start snowballing with each other's complaints that at work a lot. It's like you're the person you're sitting next to, you start talking to them, and if you're not careful, all you do is complain to each other. It's just like
Right.
natural.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I could see that downside. Now you talked about the dark clouds that sometimes can occur, and you mentioned last time when we chatted was the whole mental health side of things. Are you able to talk about that more and how you view it and some of the things that you've experienced and observed as well? Can you hear me?
I think my connection is bad. Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very open about my mental health. I think that that's something that we learn about our brains and faces and because we're trapped in there and it's hard to see it from the outside. I've definitely had to compensate for things like ADHD and things like that my entire life. I was diagnosed as an adult with bipolar 2. So there are challenges to overcome. But I think it's better when we are open about it. You don't necessarily have to broadcast it or tell everybody, but I think it's better when we accept and are honest with ourselves about it. I think it can be a lot of work, and that's why, in general, people maybe don't want to face these things, right? Especially if it's something chronic that's going to be with you your entire life. It's like you're always going to have to be putting in some work in order to compensate or in order to heal that part of you, and whether through medication or therapy or combination or whatever it is that works for you. And I think you it can be intimidating. It can be very scary for people to have to admit that they're going to be working on something the rest of their life. But that's what life is. It's a series of working on yourself, making improvements, and trying to be better.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think it is interesting to note because for a lot of people, it can be debilitating in the sense that you realize that maybe there is something that you're struggling with, but how do you now work through it, right? And it can feel like a limitation at times, but what I'm hearing from you is you looked at it slightly differently in the sense that it is something that I have to work through, and it's not the end of everything, right? There is a way out and there is a way of getting help. So, how were you, if you're able to give us a bit more of an understanding, how was it to deal with whether it was ADHD or a bipolar disorder? And how have you been able to navigate that for yourself and still be able to perform and write as you enjoy writing? So, still do the things that you enjoy doing and living your life the way you want to.
I think it goes back to I almost am grateful for it because me seeing the world in a different way helped me early on when I felt kind of like an outsider. I think it just was I did see things differently, and so I think it was easier for me to admit that, okay, I'm a little bit of a weirdo, and it didn't really bother me so much because I knew that I didn't fit in perfectly, and so I just lived with it for a long time, and then my wife and I had I won't go into too much detail, but there was a kind of a tragedy that I faced in my
Mhm.
20s, and I went to psychiatrist for the first time, and I had gone to a therapist a little bit when I was younger, but this was the first time that I really got a diagnosis, and it was for me, it was just like, "Oh, that makes so much sense." Like, when I learned about my mental health, it just was validating for, "Oh, okay, I've actually struggled with these things my whole life, so it's actually nice to hear a professional tell me that,
Yeah.
oh, okay, this is the way your brain works." And so I've been able to, but it is a lot of work because you try a medication and it doesn't work the way you want it to, or it works for a while and then you have to go back and try something else because it stops working. Or it's a lot of upkeep. And I think people would rather believe that you could light some patchouli and rub fig leaves on you or whatever it is and rub the crystals. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're cured and you don't ever have to worry about your mental health again. And I'm not saying that I don't want to bash on like natural remedies and stuff, but I'm saying there's no cure in the sense that it's a part of you. It's like I get so angry when I hear people talking about like cure for autism, right? Because like my
Mhm.
son's autistic, he's a full human being. He is a person and it's part of who he is. I don't want to cure him. That's so offensive. The same way like
Mhm.
my bipolar is part of me and my ADHD is part of me. It's I don't need to cure it. I need to compensate for it because it can steer me down paths I don't want to end up on. But
Yes.
the
Right.
but accepting it as part of who you are and just realizing that it needs some maintenance now and then. Uh, I
Mhm.
don't know. For me, that's very freeing, and I'm
Yes.
totally okay with or even enthusiastic about seeing the world in a different way than the
Mhm.
average person. So it doesn't really bother me, but I get why people get so upset about it. I do. I really do.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing from you, is if you're able to embrace it, then you could still move forward, right? I think what happens for people is when they're trying to resist it or reject it, that's where a lot of that tension arises, and it's just in general with anything in life, if you're unable to accept it, you're going to create a lot of that friction for yourself. So, as opposed to that resistance, can you accept what it is? Now, it's a lot easier said than done to actually put it into
Right.
practice to accept that part of yourself. But that comes back to the whole concept of having that sense of self, as you were touching on earlier, because once you're able to build that stronger sense of self, and if there are things that, yes, can seem debilitating at times, you could still work with them and find a way. And I think that's where many people struggle, where things get fragmented. right? Where you're rejecting parts of yourself or you're fighting with them. So I think I appreciate that perspective based on what you're sharing. So if you were to give advice to people, because a lot of people have these things that they feel that they're dealing with, and maybe they need a cure for that matter, what would you offer just from personal experience that you've learned? I know you touched on it a little bit, but in terms of
Yeah.
working with these things.
I was in my 30s before I learned that some people have never had a conversation with themselves. I talk to myself all the time, either in my head or like in the shower or whatever. And I would encourage people to not be afraid to have a conversation with yourself because it's like I think people don't think about it. They just move from one thing to the next. And so when something happens to disrupt that flow, it can be very upsetting. Don't be afraid
Mhm.
to sit down with yourself and be somewhat interrogate yourself if you need to. Treat yourself as a hostile witness. Find out what's going on in there because I think if you're honest in that way and that you will realize that you're more aware of some of these things than you want to maybe initially admit. And I think we talk about, like in my book, I talk a lot about identity. It's one of, or I should say, it's one of the big themes that I explore in my work. And I think that we talk about identity now a lot in terms of sexuality or politics or whatever. And we tend to still try to like label, box it. It's like your gender identity. That's just one that's what we're talking about now, encapsulated,
Mhm.
put it in a box and we can and people are
Yes.
very happy to put these subjects in nice little boxes, right? But your being is like this spectrum of things and
Mhm.
it's not confined, and so once you start interrogating yourself, you realize that you know who you are. You just need to accept that it doesn't necessarily fit on a spreadsheet really nicely. That's just
Yes.
not how people are. And so you can
Mhm.
still and this goes back to brand, right? You can still have an outward facing you that you curate for different audiences. That I think that's perfectly healthy because that's about boundaries. And it's as long as you are
Mhm.
100% honest with yourself when you sit down in your socks in your bedroom and you talk to yourself and you say, yeah, hey, how am I feeling? How am I doing right now? And I think just asking that simple question can mean a lot.
Yeah. And I appreciate you touching on getting out of that box and not being limited. And I think we've talked about it in different forms already throughout our conversation so far. And for me, the way I relate to that and the most simple example I can give, it's not that simple though, but when I was working in corporate, that was the feeling I would get at times to that I would be put in a box that this is your job title and these are the things you're meant to do and that's it. And this is who you show up as and this is your title. At times struggling with that because I felt now that I'm out of it and now that I'm doing things for myself that I enjoy, whether it's writing, podcasting, all these things I can do, I could see that's where I was really struggling was because I was trying to fit into this mold and be in this box within this description of who I needed to be able to succeed in a way. And that got very exhausting after a while and it didn't feel good. And now that I'm doing all the things that I enjoy doing without putting any limitations on myself, I can write if I want to write. And if I want to speak in front of people, I can speak. So there's really no limitations, but there's so much freedom in that. And I think
Yeah.
in terms of everything we've talked about so far, there's all these limitations that we put on each other and we put on ourselves as humans. And that's where a lot of the tension arises. Because even as you were talking about your experience of being a Mormon, sometimes there's limitations around that too, that these are all only the things you can do, and
Yeah.
everything else outside of that is not acceptable.
Absolutely. And that it goes back to agency, right? Because that's something when you write fiction, you have to consider the agency of your characters. Think about big characters like James Bond, right? He's like a terrible person, but he's accepted as a hero in those stories because he is like the ultimate figure of agency. He walks into a room. Nothing ever happens to James Bond. He affects the story throughout the whole story. And
Mhm.
I think giving yourself permission to be like the to affect your own life, to give back the agency that you deserve as a human being, because I think that's what, yeah, face it, in order to make people nice and good, like easy to deal with employees or citizens or whatever, that we are conditioned to give up that agency to some extent and to
Mhm.
conform and to be put in the box and to say, yes, I will do that. I will be a good soldier. And that definitely has its place. That I think you have to, in your personal life, give yourself permission to give yourself back that agency and be who you are and to make
Mhm.
decisions.
Yeah. Giving up that agency, like you said, maybe for certain aspects, it does serve a purpose, but
Right.
the other areas I can see it becoming extremely risky and concerning if you look at a century ago during the socialist movement in Soviet Russia, or sorry, the Soviet Union, or even Nazi Germany,
Right.
the agency was taken away from people, and then you could see the consequences of that, right? So
Exactly.
now you're doing things in the name of the state because you've given up your own agents moral agency for that matter as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it may be an
So
extreme example, but it's true, and we do it. I think we're prone to it, like, as a older millennial, but as a millennial, I was raised on this culture of badging and where are you a Target person or a Walmart person? Are you a are you a
mm,
are you a Prius person or a truck person or whatever it is? And it's like you everything becomes a binary. It's Apple or Windows, or there's always
mhm,
this like one camp or the other, Democrat, Republican. It's but again, humans aren't like that. Humans are messy and hard to
mhm,
define. And so it it was it took a lot of, because I became an adult during that period. And it was like I had badged myself as this, that, and the other. This is where I shop. This is who I vote with. This is who I work with. And it became very much, especially like my corporate identity, it became very much a part of who I was. And
mhm.
breaking out of that was a whole other chapter in my life. But I have a better perspective now looking back, and but I do think that it's hard for a lot of people because that was so central to their identity for so long.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And how has it served your writing? I know you've alluded to it a few times, but are you able to walk us through writing fiction and how is it different than nonfiction, and the freedom that you have in terms of creating characters in a world, and how has your own journey in life facilitated that for you?
Yeah, I don't know. It just telling stories comes naturally to me. I don't overanalyze it. But when I start writing a book, I always or a big story, I always start with two things. I start with characters and I start with themes. I never start with plot, which is like the
Mm,
reverse of a lot of writers. And the reason I do that is because that's what's important to me. It's like there are these character attributes or people in my life that I want to tell stories about, and then there are these big themes that I think are really important, and then the plot comes as an extension of that. And so, because I grew up on science fiction, I love science fiction. That's where that's what I know, write what I know, that kind of thing. And
mm,
so I've been telling these stories that I've wanted to tell for a long time, but they're about finding your place in the world and learning to use your agency. If you look at the sequel to my debut novel, the second book in the series, the main character Lily, who has a lot of me in her personality, by the way, but I could go into a long diatribe about that. But in the second book, she makes a lot of mistakes, and I wanted her to be a very flawed character, but also just someone who you always root for because she does always make that decision. She's a hero because she acts, not necessarily because she is always doing the right thing. And she's
Mhm.
trying to just keep, she's not reactive. She's trying to affect her environment. She's very passionate. And so I think in the second book, you see the consequences of some of those mistakes she makes. And I think it surprises people when they start reading it, which is what I wanted. That's part of why I chose a young woman character, because people go in with a certain set of expectations. But like when, but I've gotten so much feedback that's very positive. That's these people feel like real people. They like they mess up and and like real things, real consequences happen. And so I love this fantastical world of outer space and sci-fi because you can tell any story. You can say, and you can sneak in any sort of moral or lesson that you want people to get, and it doesn't feel forced because it's this weird fantastical world. But then when I write the characters and the themes, I try to make them very realistic and relatable.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. So thank you for sharing that. And what I know you touched on some aspects of the commonality that in terms of being able to relate to the characters. I think that's what's huge in any type of form of storytelling is can the audience relate to the story itself and see themselves in it? So when you're talking about the main character having these flaws but still making decisions and perhaps living with the consequences of those decisions, why do you think, based on everything we've talked about, that's relatable for people and that's what's made the book so popular from your perspective?
I think because people are messy, and I think because the you things aren't neatly, very, very rarely in life are things neatly resolved. There's always going to be loose ends, and there's always going to be a little bit of rough edges. And I write a lot of queer characters in my stories, and the I've gotten really good response from the queer community because I think a lot of times we overcompensate when we write minority characters or we write characters who are of a group that is traditionally oppressed because we want them to be like perfect now. It's, that you have the queer character who just is good at everything and they have perfect morals but I think it's important also to see just that those people existing as people. It's like that their queerness doesn't necessarily change their relationship to the world in other ways. And so I try to have people just be very realistic and just exist. And I think that people relate to that because you might be the villain one morning when you wake up on the wrong side of bed, or you might be the hero that day. And I think
Mhm.
that can be refreshing to get that complexity in a story. And it's not necessarily back to putting people in boxes. It's not binary either. It's like people
Mhm.
are complicated. This person might do a very good thing in the story, but you also might not like them as a character.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and even with comic books, I know you mentioned that earlier, but there's that common theme of the hero, right? The hero's journey is a very common plot in many stories, including movies. You see that, and there's something that draws people in because they relate to the hero. And I wonder how much of it is that I wish I had that person's courage to do the things, and I could see parts of myself in it. And you're touching on some of those elements too, where things are messy, nothing not everything is perfect. Even in the hero's journey, you see the initial phases, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen that only happens through mistakes and failure at times, and then to go away and come back as that hero in that story. Why do you think that, again, in that sense, what's appealing about that outside of the messiness, but the courage part of being able to go out into the world and then do something with all the skills and superpowers you've developed?
Right. I think that it's uh like the most relatable thing. It's elemental
Mhm.
because when you boil down the hero's journey, it's really about solving a problem. So it always begins setting up the hero with some sort of catastrophe that they have to then solve. And as humans, I think that is we can all relate to that, right? And in addition to relating to that, it's just how our brains work, where you, if you haven't worked on yourself a lot and something unexpectedly happens, something bad or a emergency, you tend to react with like panic, right? It's like you see the reactionary behavior on people. And but that's like the opposite of when you're witnessing the hero in the story who's like taking control and they're gonna. And so I think we all want to be, that's what we would like to be. So we hopefully
Mhm.
can do work on ourselves so that I saw a video the other day of a car rolling down the driveway and the owner of the car was like very calm about it. And everybody was commenting like, "Wow, how can he remain so calm?" And it's like, he can't
Mm.
stop the car. It's actually very rational to behave that way. And it got me thinking like that is the sign of somebody who's actually done a lot of work on themselves because they could stand there and go, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to figure this out," instead of panicking and running after the car. And so I think that's in our own lives, that's like being a hero, right? It's like having the mental fortitude to get through these situations that would
Mhm.
like normally send you into a panic. And so we relate to that
Mhm.
in very elemental terms, I think.
Yes. Yeah, and the other thing I'm taking out of our conversation today is, as you were talking about humans falling on a spectrum, which to me, I equate to us all being unique in different ways. Individually, we're all very unique, and sometimes we reject parts of ourselves. But what I also think, where in terms of bringing it back to the hero's journey, is we all have these unique superpowers and skills that then, if we weren't to reject it, we can add so much value. And that's what I'm getting out of what I heard from you too, is you were able to accept all these parts of yourself and put it to use in a way that you enjoy, and it's brought you a lot of joy in your life.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Christian, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciated your perspective on things and your insights. Now, for listeners that want to learn more about your work, including your books, what are some ways they can do that and find all these things online?
You can find me on social media at Hurst Publishing on Instagram and TikTok, or you can go to check out the book at lillystarlingbook.com, or really just Google it and you'll be able to find it. And all my links are at christianhurst.link. So yeah, I encourage people to check it out. It's a lot of fun and I enjoy writing it. I'm working on the third one now.
Awesome. We'll put all of that in the show notes, but thanks again, Christian. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.